The sky above Nocturne was not a sky made for dreams. It was a canvas of ash and flame, where the light of 7 dying suns painted the world in endless twilight. The mountains bled molten rivers, and the air itself shimmered with heat so fierce it seemed to burn the soul. Among the roaring volcanoes and blackened plains walked men who were not yet men, children tempered by a planet that showed mercy to none. It was here, on this cruel world of fire and rebirth, that legends were born, and among them one child would rise to become more than flesh, more than fear, more than fate itself. His name, before it was stripped away by the fires of transformation, was Takar. He was 12 when the first death came. It was not a warrior's death nor the slow decay of age, but the burning death of innocence. The day the forge he tended exploded, sending waves of molten metal through the settlement of Hesiod's wake. The fire consumed everything: homes, people, dreams. Takar had been close enough to the blast to feel his skin peel away, yet far enough to live. He crawled from the ashes, clutching the hammer his father had forged before the eruption claimed him. That hammer would never strike iron again. Instead, it would become the symbol of what was to come. In the fire, the boy who was Takar died, and something else began to breathe, something harder, something unyielding. The salamanders found him 3 days later, wandering through the volcanic plains half-mad from pain and thirst. They came not as angels but as gods of war, 8 feet tall, their skin black as obsidian, their eyes glowing like living embers. To a dying child, they were fire-given form. Captain Varan Dravis knelt before him, his armor scorched from a recent skirmish against dark elder raiders, and looked into the boy's trembling eyes. "You are not afraid of the fire," he said. The boy could barely speak, but he managed a rasped answer. "Fire makes us strong." That answer sealed his fate. He was taken to Mount Deathfire, where the trials began. The process of becoming a salamander is not one of glory. It is one of agony. Takar endured the gene seed implantation, the organ grafts, the hypnodoctrination. He screamed until his voice died. He bled until his blood ran black with chemical refinement. And when it was done, when his heart beat in rhythm with the Emperor's chosen, he stood reborn. The mirror showed not a boy, but a giant with skin like volcanic stone and eyes that glowed with eternal flame. The apothecaries named him Brother Takar, for his old name was unworthy of what he had become. But in the silence of his soul, he still heard the echoes of the forge explosion, the sound of his first death. Years passed, decades by the counting of lesser men. The salamanders were not like other chapters. Where others saw only war, they saw duty. Where others burned for conquest, they burned for protection. On Nocturne, every forge was sacred, for the forge symbolized creation, life through destruction. And so too were the salamanders, the fire-forged protectors of humanity, who saw every life they saved as a victory greater than any enemy slain. Takar learned the creed of fire. To serve is to burn is to be pure. His mind became a weapon sharper than any blade, his body a vessel for the Emperor's will. Yet deep within him, the child who had lost everything still remembered the softness of human touch, the warmth of a father's voice. It was that ember of humanity that made him different, even among his brothers. On the eve of his first deployment, Takar stood before the great forge of Promethean's heart, the spiritual center of the Salamanders Chapter fortress. Flames leapt and danced across the anvil where relics of 10,000 years were born. Master Forge Father Tushan, his armor adorned with symbols of Vulkan's eternal flame, approached. "Do you know what it means to be forged, Brother Takar?" The Forge Father asked. "It means to endure," Takar replied. Tushan nodded, his molten eyes studying the young Astartes. "Yes, but remember this, even fire that purifies can consume what it touches. Never let your flame become hunger." The lesson would haunt Takar for centuries. Their first campaign together came swiftly, the purging of Draxus V, a world shrouded in ash and despair. A rebellion had broken out in the manufactorums that fueled an entire sector's war effort. When the salamanders descended, they found not traitors but slaves, starving and broken under the weight of imperial neglect. The local governors had hoarded supplies, leaving millions to die in the dark. The salamanders could have ended the revolt in a day, burned the insurgents to ash, and claimed victory. But Captain Varan ordered restraint. "We are not here to destroy," he told his men, "but to remind them of mercy." Takar fought beside him through the chaos, fists wreathed in fire, heart torn between duty and compassion. For every traitor he slew, another begged for salvation, and in their eyes, he saw reflections of himself, burning, desperate, clinging to life in a world of fire. When the smoke cleared, Drax's fee was saved not by extermination, but by the Salamanders' refusal to abandon their humanity. Yet the cost was high. Brother Malcor, one of Takar's closest kin, fell defending a group of children from an orbital bombardment gone astray. As Malcor's broken armor was carried from the ruins, Takar knelt beside it, his gauntlet slick with ash and blood. "He saved them," whispered one of the survivors. Takar said nothing. He only placed Malcor's weapon upon the forge and whispered the creed. "The fire takes, but it also gives." That night he swore he would never let the flame consume his soul as it had consumed his world. Years became centuries. The galaxy shifted and bled, but the Salamanders remained constant, unyielding, compassionate, eternal. For Takar, each campaign was another trial by fire, another step toward understanding what it meant to be more than a warrior. He fought on Hephaestus Reach, where demon engines turned the skies to molten glass. He saved colonies from Xenos predation, rebuilt cities his own flame had destroyed, and carried orphans from the rubble of worlds the Imperium had already written off as lost. Every life he saved was a spark against the darkness. Every loss he endured was a scar upon his soul. Yet still he endured. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when he questioned the purpose of it all. The Emperor was silent. The Imperium was a machine grinding endlessly forward, fueled by the blood of its children. In those moments, Takar would return to the forge, to the fire that had birthed him, and stare into the molten glow until the questions burned away. For in that fire he saw not just destruction but creation, the promise that from ruin something pure might yet emerge. He was the living embodiment of that promise. And so Brother Takar of the Salamanders carried on, a giant among men, a guardian forged in eternal flame. The galaxy called him many names: monster, hero, savior, executioner. But he called himself only what he had always been, a servant of fire. His story was only beginning. The wars to come would test even the purity of flame itself. But for now, beneath the ever-burning skies of Nocturne, a legend smoldered, one born not of light but of fire. There is a saying among the Salamanders: mercy burns brighter than vengeance. But in the black deserts of Karen, that truth was tested and the fire of compassion flickered. Like a dying ember, the world of Karen was once a jewel of the segmentum tempestus and a fortress, world rich with mineral veins and manufactories that built the weapons of the Imperium's endless wars. But when the warp storms came, Karen changed. The skies wept ash instead of rain, and the deserts glowed with unnatural fire. The chaos warbands that came through the rift were not mere raiders. They were the broken remnants of the word-bearers, zealots who worshipped flame not as a forge, but as a god of unmaking. Their leader, the demon prince Karazoth the Unbound, had twisted Karen into his altar. He called his dominion the Crucible Eternal, where human captives were sacrificed in pyres that burned with screaming souls. It was into this hell that the Salamanders were sent, not as conquerors, but as saviors of what humanity remained. Brother Takar was no longer the novice of Drax's fear. 2 centuries had hardened him. The scars that crossed his obsidian skin were maps of every war he had survived. He had become a veteran sergeant, his armor etched with runes of fire and remembrance, each one representing a life saved, not a life taken. He stood aboard the strike cruiser Vigil of Nocturne, looking down at the burning world below. Captain Varen Dravis, now an aged warrior whose hair had turned silver beneath his helmet, placed a hand on Takar's shoulder. "We go into the Crucible," he said, voice low, grave. "The enemy is not just the demon, it is despair itself. Do not let it claim you, brother." Takar nodded. "Fire purifies, but even fire can die if starved of purpose." "Then keep yours burning," Varen said, "for all our sakes." The Salamanders made planetfall under a storm of fire and ruin. The ash of the dead filled the air like snow. The once golden cities of Karen were reduced to skeletal towers that wept molten tears. The sky bled red as the demon forges burned without end. The word-bearers were everywhere, chanting heresies that made the air hum with corruption. Yet amid that horror there were survivors, thousands of humans driven into the catacombs beneath the ruined manufactorums, clinging to faith that the Emperor's angels would come. And come they did. Takar led the first assault, flame roaring from his heavy incinerator as he and his squad carved through heretic ranks. Every step was agony. The ground burned beneath their boots and demonic whispers gnawed at their minds. But the Salamanders endured. They always endured. When they reached the catacombs, they found what was left of the survivors. Emaciated figures hollow-eyed, their bodies tattooed with the sigils of chaos by force. Among them was a child, no more than 9 Terran years old, holding what remained of her mother's hand, bones wrapped in blackened flesh. She did not cry. She only looked up at Takar with eyes that no longer knew innocence. "Are you here to burn us too?" she asked. The words hit him harder than any bolter shell. For a moment, Takar could not speak. The flames of his weapon dimmed. "No," he said finally, voice breaking through the rebreather. "We are here to end the fire." But as he looked around at the ruined faces, he wondered if such an ending was even possible. For 7 days and nights, the Salamanders defended those catacombs. The word-bearers came in waves, screaming praises to their dark gods. Each assault was more frenzied than the last, each heretic more twisted by the demon's touch. Brother Hesker fell first, his armor split open by a possessed war engine that tore him in half before Takar could intervene. Then Brother Rian, consumed by a warp flame that devoured even ceramite. But still they held. Each brother's death was a torch passed to the next, a promise to hold the line no matter the cost. On the 8th night, the enemy brought forth their champion, a Chaos Lord fused into a machine of living brass and bone. His laughter echoed through the catacombs like thunder. "You cannot save them," he roared. "They are mine. Their faith feeds me." Takar stepped forward, his voice steady. "Then starve." The battle that followed was not fought in silence or fury, but in faith. Takar's flamer roared white-hot, cleansing the unholy machine in fire so pure it turned warp-born steel to vapor. His armor melted, his flesh burned, but he did not falter. In the final moment, when his weapon ran dry, he seized his hammer, the same design he had forged as a child on Nocturne, and struck the demon lord down with a blow that split its skull like molten ore. When the beast fell, the entire catacomb shook. The survivors watched as the Salamanders stood unbroken amid the ruin, their armor blackened, their hearts still burning. But victory came with a price. Captain Varen was mortally wounded during the final push toward Karazoth's temple. His blood, bright against the ash, stained Takar's hands as he knelt beside him. "You have done what I could not," the captain whispered. "You carried the fire farther than I ever did." Takar shook his head. "I only followed your light." "No," Varen smiled weakly. "You became it." And with that, the fire of one of Nocturne's greatest sons went out. When the demon prince Karazoth finally appeared, it was not in battle, but in temptation. He came to Takar in the guise of a human, a child with red eyes and ash-streaked skin. "You saved them," the creature said softly. "But for how long? The Imperium will forget them. The Inquisition will burn this world to purge the taint. You could stop them. You could rule here, protect them forever, be their god of fire." For a heartbeat, Takar hesitated. He thought of Draxus, of the children who had survived, only to die later in another war. He thought of Varen's words, "Keep your fire burning." Then he raised his hammer. "I am no god," he said. "I am a salamander." With a roar that shook the mountains, he brought the hammer down, and the fire of Karazoth was extinguished. When the Inquisition arrived days later, they found Karen half in ruins but alive. Nearly 10,000 civilians had survived under the Salamander's protection. Yet the Inquisitor's eyes were cold. "This world is tainted," he said. "It must be cleansed." Takar stood before him, his armor still smoking, his hammer resting against the scorched earth. "If you would burn them," he said, "then burn me too." The Inquisitor hesitated. Few mortals could defy an Astartes and live. But there was something in Takar's gaze, something ancient and unbreakable. In the end, Karen was spared. Official records would later claim the world was purged by orbital fire. But the truth was buried, known only to the Salamanders who had walked through hell and refused to let humanity die in the flames. That night, Takar climbed the blackened hills alone. He looked out at the horizon, where the fires of Karen still burned. His armor was cracked, his soul heavy, but in the glow of the dying embers he saw faces. Malkor, Varen, Hesker, brothers who had carried the light before him. "Fire consumes," he whispered. but it also remembers. He pressed his gauntlet into the ash and left his handprint there, a mark to endure long after he was gone. The wind rose, carrying sparks into the night. To anyone else, it would have looked like the world was dying, but to Takar it looked like rebirth. The journey home was unlike any battle Takar had fought. The fires of Karen had burned out, but the embers clung to his soul. He stood upon the deck of the vigil of Nocturne as it cut through the void, a lone shadow among giants. The stars outside the viewport shimmered like the souls of the fallen, distant yet unforgotten. The Salamanders had won, but victory in the Imperium was a fragile, hollow thing. Karen was saved, yet countless others had died. Brother Hesker, Captain Varen, the people who had looked to them as gods. Takar had held the line, but in doing so, he had begun to question what the line truly meant. Was salvation measured in lives spared or in faith unbroken? And when the fires faded, who decided which of the two was worth saving? When the ship descended into the burning skies of Nocturne, the homeworld of the Salamanders, it felt less like a return and more like a pilgrimage. The world below glowed with volcanic brilliance, black mountains spewing rivers of molten gold, storm clouds of ash and lightning painting the sky with endless fury. Yet amid the chaos there was beauty, for Nocturne was not just fire, it was the forge that birthed legends. Every salamander came home to its crucible sooner or later, to be reforged or broken. As Takar stepped onto the surface, the heat wrapped around him like a memory. He could feel the pulse of the planet in his bones, the heartbeat of a god sleeping beneath the molten crust. He knelt and pressed his hand to the basalt ground. "I have returned," he whispered, "but I am not the same." At the Sanctum Pyra, the great fortress monastery of the Salamanders, the air trembled with the sound of forges and hymnals. The artisans hammered relics of war while chaplains chanted oaths to the Emperor and Vulkan, the Primarch who had walked among mortals. In the Hall of Ashes, the names of the fallen were carved into obsidian pillars, each letter glowing faintly, alive with the heat of remembrance. Takar stood before the pillar of Captain Varen Dravis and traced the engraving with his gauntlet. "You said fire forges," he murmured. "But what if it destroys instead?" A voice echoed behind him. "Then perhaps you've yet to understand the forge." It was Chaplain Elysius, his black armor gleaming in the half-light, the Crozius Arcanum resting across his chest. His voice was deep, patient like magma flowing through stone. "You carry guilt, Brother Takar. You mistake it for humility, but it is poison. Vulkan did not teach us to mourn endlessly. He taught us to build from loss. That is the way of the fire, to consume but also to shape." Takar lowered his head. "I failed Varen. I failed the people of Karen. I killed to save, and in saving I destroyed." Elysius approached, placing a hand on his pauldron. "Then forge meaning from your failure. The Emperor does not ask perfection, only perseverance." In the following weeks, Takar immersed himself in the forges, seeking solace in creation. He built relics of iron and adamantine, forged hammers for initiates and armor plates for brothers bound for war. Each strike of the hammer was an echo of memory, each spark a ghost of a face he'd lost. The apprentices whispered about him, the silent giant who never spoke, who worked until his hands bled, who refused the feasts and ceremonies of victory. To them he was legend made flesh, but to Takar he was only a shadow. One night, as the forge burned low, the shadows in the corner of his workshop flickered, and from them stepped a figure of impossible stature. A towering presence cloaked in fire and sorrow. The air trembled. Takar fell to one knee, his heart hammering. Primarch Vulkan, the eternal father of the Salamanders, stood before him. Or perhaps it was only a vision, a reflection of faith. His skin was obsidian, his eyes burning with the light of a dying sun. He looked down at Takar with both warmth and burden. "You bear the fire well," Vulkan said, his voice like thunder over lava. "I bear its scars," Takar replied. "Then you bear its truth," Vulkan said. "Every flame leaves a mark, but do not mistake the mark for the wound. You are the forged, Takar. You are what survives the fire." Takar bowed his head. "Father, I see only ruin in what I have done." Vulkan's gaze softened. "Ruin is the first step to creation. From ruin I built Nocturne. From loss I built you." When the vision faded, Takar remained kneeling for hours, the heat of the forge pulsing around him. For the first time in years, the fire within him felt alive again, not as punishment but as purpose. He rose and began to forge once more, not weapons this time, but symbols. Small iron figurines of the fallen, etched with runes of remembrance. He placed them in the Hall of Ashes one by one, whispering a name with each. When he reached Varen's, he hesitated. Then he placed the figurine at the base of the pillar and said, "The fire burns still, my captain, but Nocturne's peace is never eternal." A message came through the astropathic choir, a distress call from the world of Sithra Minor, deep in the volcanic sectors of the Ultima Segmentum. Reports spoke of a firestorm that moved like a living thing, consuming cities and leaving behind nothing but glass and cinder. The Mechanicus called it a natural phenomenon. The Inquisition suspected demonic corruption, but the Salamanders recognized something older, something primal. The flame had come alive again. Chaplain Elysius summoned Takar to the council. "Brother," he said gravely, "the fire on Sithra Minor bears the mark of the warp, but it also bears the mark of you." Takar frowned. "Of me? Your hammer, the one you forged on Nocturne. Fragments of its energy signature were detected in the Inferno. We believe..." Something from Karen survived. A chill ran through him, colder than any fire could burn. He remembered Karen, the moment he struck down the demon lord. The way the hammer had glowed white-hot beyond mortal heat. Had something been unleashed in that strike? Had part of Karazoth's essence escaped? "I will go," Takar said. "If my past has returned, I will end it." Elysius nodded. "Then go with fire's blessing, brother. And remember, it is not the fire that corrupts, but the hand that wields it." When Takar boarded the strike cruiser Anvil of Dawn, he felt the old weight return. Not guilt, but responsibility. Around him, younger salamanders prepared their weapons, their faces shining with devotion. They looked at him as a living legend, the savior of Karen, but he saw only a man still learning to forgive himself. He looked out the viewport at the burning star that lit Nocturne's horizon. It pulsed like a forge heart, eternal, relentless. "Fire purifies," he whispered, "but it also remembers." And as the ship vanished into the warp, Takar wondered which of those truths would claim him first. The stars burned like dying embers. Across the void as the strike cruiser Vigilant Pyre slipped from the warp and into the orbit of Sithra Minor. What awaited them below was not the battle they had expected. It was something far worse. The world hung in silence, wrapped in a haze of dark crimson clouds that pulsed like veins filled with molten blood. From orbit, the planet appeared to breathe, as if some vast unseen heart beat beneath its crust. Vox channels crackled with whispers instead of words, voices that echoed with familiarity, as though the planet itself spoke in the tones of long-dead brothers. Sergeant Takar stood upon the command deck, his black and green armor scarred from centuries of war, his gaze fixed on the burning sphere. He felt the heat even through the ship's adamantium walls. "It's calling," he murmured, his voice low, the words meant for no one but himself. The chaplain turned to him, his skull helm gleaming in the dim red light. "All fire calls to us, brother, but not all fires are holy." The descent through the atmosphere was unlike any other drop. The storm that wrapped the world clawed at their landing craft with hands of flame. Bolts of lightning the color of blood tore through the clouds, slamming into the hull with bone-shaking fury. Through the view slit, Takar saw rivers of fire cutting across the planet's surface like living veins. The land itself moved, shifting, folding, groaning, as if trying to expel something from its burning core. When they landed, the earth screamed. The tremor nearly threw them off balance, and even through his armor's sealed systems, Takar smelled ash and something else. Something sweet and rotten, like burnt flesh mixed with incense. Around them, the sky bled red and shapes moved in the haze. The ground was littered with blackened statues that might once have been men. Every face was frozen in agony, mouths open in eternal screams, eyes melted to glass. Yet beneath the horror there was beauty, a cruel beauty that spoke of power unbound by mercy. As they advanced, the Auspex readings grew erratic. The landscape shifted each time they blinked. Mountains appeared where there had been plains. Rivers reversed their flow. The very laws of physics twisted like molten metal. The chaplain's litanies over the Vox were their only anchor to sanity. "Remember the forge, brothers. Remember the flame that purifies, not the one that consumes." They pushed onward toward the coordinates of the distress signal, a ruin that had once been a cathedral to the Emperor, now a spire of obsidian and bone that reached into the storm-racked heavens. As they neared it, the whispers grew louder. They were not random. They spoke his name. Takar. Takar of Nocturne. He froze mid-step, bolter raised, scanning the haze. No enemy revealed itself, yet the heat rising from the ground felt familiar. It was the same searing warmth that had touched him when he had been just a boy on Mount Deathfire, when his flesh had burned and his humanity had melted away. Inside the cathedral, the walls were alive. Fire pulsed beneath translucent stone like blood beneath skin. Iconography of the Emperor was twisted, his divine visage warped into something monstrous, eyes glowing with the same fire that now filled the world. At the altar they found what had sent the distress signal, a figure kneeling, encased in ceramite blackened by fire, one hand still clutching a broken crozius. The chaplain approached slowly, reverence in every motion. "Brother?" he whispered. The figure turned its head. The armor's faceplate was fused shut, yet from within came a voice like crackling embers. "You came too late." Then the body crumbled to ash. From that ash the flame rose, alive, thinking, whispering. And Takar felt something inside him tremble. The fire spoke in the voice of Brother Kai's, the artificer who had died centuries ago on Corrigus Thekun to save those miners. "You left us in the dark, brother." But the fire remembers. The squad opened fire. Bolter shells detonated in the air, torn apart by invisible heat. The living flame surged upward, forming shapes, half human, half burning memory. Each silhouette that emerged was a reflection of those they had lost. Brother Terran, Brother Piriel, Captain Drouse, each face formed in fire, their voices overlapping in a chorus of grief. "We burned for you," they cried. "We died for you." The chaplain bellowed litanies of purification, his voice raw with devotion. "Begone, false echoes! You are not our kin!" But Takar could not look away. The flames did not attack him. They surrounded him, whispering in the tongue of Nocturne, calling him child of fire. He saw the past in their light, the forge where he was made, the faces of those he had lost, the burning woman named Livia, the boy on Valos 9, all of them, woven together in one inferno of memory. It was not chaos. It was something else, something born of pain and sacrifice, shaped by the will to save and now yearning to be understood. "Takar," the fire said, its voice shifting, merging with his own. "You gave us fire to live. Now we return it." Flames engulfed him. His brothers shouted over the vox, but their voices were distant. His armor temperature spiked past survival thresholds. His skin blistered beneath the ceramite, and for the first time in centuries he screamed. The pain was unbearable, yet beneath it there was knowledge. The fire showed him everything. The truth of Vulkan's gift. The gene seed of the salamanders was not only a biological marvel, it was a spiritual conduit, binding them to the primal essence of creation itself. Fire was not merely a weapon, it was a soul. And the souls of those who died in flame lingered, neither damned nor saved, waiting for a purpose. Sithra Minor was not a world cursed by chaos. It was a graveyard of sacrifice, a world that had become alive with the memories of those who had burned for others. When the flames receded, Takar was still standing. His armor was scorched black, his helm melted into his flesh, his eyes glowing faintly red. Around him the cathedral was silent. The living fire was gone, absorbed, consumed, or perhaps united with him. His brothers approached cautiously, their weapons lowered but ready. The chaplain placed a gauntleted hand on his shoulder. "Brother, are you—" "Alive," Takar answered, his voice a rasp of cinders. But changed. He turned toward the burning horizon. The storm above had stilled, and from the ashes of the cathedral small flames danced harmlessly, flickering like candles in the wind. "The fire was not our enemy," he said. "It was our kin." The chaplain stared at him for a long moment, then bowed his head. "Then may its memory guide us." That night, beneath the blood-red sky of Sithra Minor, Takar stood alone amidst the ruins, the ashes swirling around him like ghosts. He raised his hands and felt warmth, not the destructive heat of war, but the steady, living pulse of the forge. In that moment, he understood what Vulkan had meant when he said that humanity must endure through compassion as much as strength. The salamanders did not wield fire to destroy. They wielded it to remind the galaxy that even in the darkest void, light still burns. The world of Sithra Minor would be marked as purged in the Imperial archives, a world lost to corruption. But for Takar, it was something else. It was proof that memory never dies, that even the flames that consume us can be reborn into something pure. And so, he whispered a prayer, not to the Emperor, nor to Vulkan, but to the fire itself. "Forgive us," he said softly. "We forgot that you were never our enemy." The embers rose into the night, carrying with them the voices of those long dead. For the first time in centuries, Takar felt peace, and somewhere beyond the veil of reality, deep within the heart of the warp, a spark of that peace ignited something vast and eternal. The fire lived on. The years that followed Sithra Minor were years of silence. The salamanders who returned from that mission spoke little of what they had seen. The records in the chapter's librarium listed the planet as cleansed, the engagement as successful, and the casualties as acceptable. The truth, as ever, was more complicated. Sergeant Takar no longer fought as he once had. There was something in his presence that unsettled even his battle brothers. Something ancient, something that burned too brightly to be entirely human. His armor, once emerald green, now bore a patina of scorched black that no forge could polish away. In the darkness of the forge chapels, the artisans whispered that the armor breathed. The Promethean priests said they saw light flicker from the joints as though a living flame moved beneath the ceramite. When Takar walked through the halls of Hesiod's wake, candles flared of their own accord. When he spoke, the air shimmered with heat. But none questioned his faith, for in his eyes, still faintly glowing with the fire of Sithra Minor, burned the unshakable conviction that the Emperor's light was not confined to doctrine or decree. It was a fire that lived within all who chose to endure. He returned to the battlefield when duty called, though each campaign seemed to strip a little more of his humanity away. On the demon world of Acheron's Gate, he fought alone for 3 days and nights to hold a breach against a tide of horrors until the fleet arrived. On the irradiated plains of Melchior Nime, he stood unflinching amid atomic storms, his skin blistering, his armor melting, his faith unbroken. And through it all, he never raised his voice in anger, never claimed glory, never sought remembrance. His brothers began to speak of him in reverent tones. The immolated one, they called him, the warrior who had seen the soul of fire and lived. But even legends must end, and Takar knew his time was coming. His gene seed had begun to fail. His body, though reforged 1,000 times, could no longer contain the burning soul within. Yet he felt no fear, only purpose. Fire is not meant to be contained, he once told the chapter's reclusiarch. It must burn, or it dies. His final battle came on a nameless moon near the Eye of Terror. The world was ash and glass, its sky torn by warp storms, its surface crawling with the corrupted remains of a once proud Imperial colony. A lesser chapter might have declared exterminatus from orbit, but the salamanders descended. They always descended. It was their way, to look their duty in the eye and meet it face to face, no matter the cost. Takar led the assault personally, though his frame was weakened and his movements slower than they once were. Still, his presence inspired those who followed. "We are the light," he told them as they formed ranks upon the blasted plain. "And though we burn, we do not vanish." The enemy that came against them was a nightmare of steel and shadow, chaos-spawned machines fused with the screaming remnants of men. The air itself howled with madness. Yet amid the storm, the salamanders stood firm. Flamers roared and the darkness screamed as holy fire spread across the wasteland. The battle lasted for hours, then days, then nights, without number. There was no sunrise on that world, only the endless red glow of the warp overhead. One by one, Takar's brothers fell, consumed by enemies too twisted to be described. Yet even as his armor was shattered, even as the warp tore open beneath his feet, Takar stood unbroken. The corrupted engines of chaos closed around him, their claws rending through ceramite, their blasphemous prayers echoing across the ruins. He planted his feet and raised his weapon one last time. "Vulkan lives," he whispered, and the world caught fire. What happened next would be recorded only in fragments. A detonation of Promethean energy brighter than any star. A blast that scorched the planet clean and silenced the warp storm that had raged there for centuries. When the relief fleet arrived, there was no trace of the enemy. No trace of Takar, only a single glassed crater glowing softly in the shape of a hammer. The chapter declared him lost in battle, his name etched upon the wall of remembrance in the fortress monastery of Nocturne. but those who knew him best refused to call him dead. On certain nights when the volcanoes of Mount Deathfire roared and rivers of lava flowed like molten gold, some claimed to see a figure walking the ridges, a warrior wreathed in flame, his eyes glowing like twin coals, his voice carried by the wind. "The fire remembers," they would whisper. Pilgrims began to visit those ridges, leaving offerings of forged metal and hand-carved icons. And sometimes, when the night was darkest, the offerings would melt and reform into shapes of hammers and flames, as though touched by unseen hands. The Promethean priest took it as a sign that Takar's spirit had joined with the eternal forge, becoming part of the sacred flame that binds all salamanders to their father Vulkan. Centuries passed. The Imperium burned on. New wars rose like tempests and fell into ashes. New generations of salamanders took the oaths of fire and carried the torch of mercy and might into the endless night. But still the legend endured. Recruits whispered of the immolated one, of a sergeant who had become more than man, more than Astartes, a being of living flame who walked the boundary between myth and truth. They said that when the chapter's fortress was threatened, the forges burned hotter, and weapons tempered in their light struck truer. They said that in moments of greatest peril, when all hope seemed lost, a figure of blackened armor and burning eyes would appear upon the battlefield, wielding a hammer that glowed like the heart of a dying star. Whether it was real or legend, none could say. But for those who saw it, faith was renewed, and courage rekindled. On the 1000th anniversary of his death, the Reclusiarch stood before the eternal flame of Nocturne, a fire said to have burned since the days of the Primarch himself, and placed a single relic at its base, a blackened gauntlet, fused and unyielding, recovered from that nameless moon near the eye. "For the one who became the fire," he said softly. The flames rose higher, shifting from gold to green, casting shadows that danced like living things. And in that light, for the briefest of moments, those gathered swore they saw a silhouette in the flame, broad-shouldered, unbowed, watching. Then it was gone. The fire dimmed to its steady glow once more, but the forge-smith said its heat had deepened, its song grown stronger, and so the legend of Takar of the Salamanders became eternal, no longer bound by flesh or time, but woven into the very essence of the chapter's soul. His story became a reminder that fire is not only destruction, but hope. Not merely an end, but a beginning. In the darkness of the 41st millennium, when humanity's light flickers and the galaxy teeters on the edge of extinction, the salamanders endure. Because they know the truth that Takar learned on the day he burned and was reborn. That compassion is the hottest flame of all, and that even in death, the fire still lives.